and welcome to our three speakers tonight. There's Maureen Collier, Dr. Christine Thuring, and Sarah Ross. So I'll start with Maureen. Maureen has been a Nature Vancouver member for 15 years. She's a bird lover, a retired accountant, and a volunteer on climate change issues. So thank you for being here, Maureen. Dr. Christine Thuring is a plant ecologist who is most active with the botany group of Nature Vancouver, but she's a founding member of a board member of the Native Bee Society of BC. She's also an active land defender and campaigner with Protect the Planet, which is a coalition focused on stopping the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline and tar sands expansion in general. Christine holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Biology from Trent University, a Master's in Horticulture from the Pennsylvania State University, and a PhD in Landscape from the University of Sheffield. And finally, she is an instructor in the Faculty of Science and Horticulture at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. And Sarah Ross she's a Burnaby-based mother and cyclist and explorer, caretaker of land, harvester and gleaner of wild plants. She's a former lead instructor at the Soaring Eagle Nature School and has practiced with Nature Connected and birds regionally for over 20 years. And that's about it. So if each of you, whoever wants to go first, I'll let you three ladies take over and I will mute myself.
Okay, thanks, Colin. Thanks, Selena. Can you see my screen? And we're good to go. Okay. So it's a real honor to be speaking to you all tonight and wonderful to have us all together. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the coolest application of field ecology. I think I'll be doing the bulk of the talking. I'm a teacher, so I'm used to it. Sarah will step in and tell us about the applied fieldwork that she is our superstar on, and Maureen is supporting us as we go. So just to give you a sense of the outline, we're going to look at the story, we're going to look at some policy, go through the materials and methods, and then explore the adventure that we went through last spring, close with the outcome and lessons learned. So I guess if there are any questions that come up, maybe put them into the chat, and maybe we can field them afterwards. And if it's something really pressing, then maybe put up your hand and yeah, see how we go. So I have the honor and delight to start us off with this story. So we all know the Anna's hummingbird. We were just talking about this wonderful jewel before. Actually been Vancouver city bird, uncontested since 2017. So this is our star of the evening, and perhaps a shining star of inspiration, as you can see. So the big story is that last spring and throughout the summer, the Anna's hummingbird actually slowed down a tar sands pipeline with the help of people. So this is a story of love, overcoming violence, destruction, and disempowerment. So I'll just give you some background on the story, or the project rather. So you've probably heard about the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline. This is a 1,150 kilometer new pipe expansion that would transport diluted bitumen over the Rocky Mountains, through the entire province of British Columbia, over lots of unceded Indigenous land. And it will terminate at Burrard Inlet. It would triple pipeline capacity from 300,000 of the existing pipeline to 890,000 barrels a day, and increase tanker traffic from 60 tankers a year to over 400 a year. So the context for this story is the green spaces of Metro Vancouver, which is basically what segment 7 of this pipeline cuts through. Now let's see if my animations work. There we go. So Colony Farms Regional Park, and you'll notice the Fraser Crossing there. Also the Brunette River Conservation Area, this little fragment of green space attached to Burnaby Lake, and also Burnaby Mountain. So you can just see the tank farm there at the base of Simon Fraser. So this is sort of the context that we're looking at today, segment 7. And I should add, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the ins and outs of the project. It's quite controversial, and I don't want to get into it too much because we are intending to talk about the birds and the power of people and love. But some of the serious concerns about this pipeline is that it's a very high pressure thing. Diluted bitumen is, first of all, highly toxic, but also the consistency of peanut butter. So the pressure required to move that kind of mass is apparently 900 pounds per square inch. Of course, this is a real concern when you consider that this pipeline passes within 1 kilometer of 9 elementary schools. That's from K until high school. Of course, there's also extreme fire risk at the tank farm, which is, as I pointed out, on Burnaby Mountain. Most tank farms in the world are not located within urban settlements. They're very much on the extremities of urban settlements because when they do go off, they're quite catastrophic. So that's an additional concern. And then, of course, the fact that this tanker terminal will lead to such increased tanker traffic has a lot of people concerned about the state of our southern resident orcas and the entire marine environment. So that's the Westridge Marine Tanker Terminal, under construction as we speak. So the focus of what we're going to talk about this evening is actually the Brunette. So the Brunette River Conservation Area is actually a salmon-bearing river. It connects to the Fraser. As you can see, it's sandwiched by Highway 1, by rail and arterial roads. It's actually a super important corridor for birds, mammals, amphibians, and fish. And we'll look at some of the biodiversity that this area supports. So fact, the Brunette River and its corridor is one of the best conservation success stories of this region. It was considered dead in the 70s. Salmon were completely wiped out, but they have been brought back through years of collaborative projects, especially stream keepers. It's a natural gem that exists precariously in the middle of a city. So that's quoted by Dr. Mike Pearson, who has done a lot of work on the Brunette. And this chum salmon is just one example of just the beauty of this ecosystem. So yeah, it is an important corridor. And the biodiversity that you can witness just on a regular day is amazing. Just kind of passing by, it seems so busy with all the traffic, and yet we've been there. We've seen otters, a family of otters. We've seen merganser and heron, both great blue and green, kingfishers, a diversity of raptors, turtles, 3 species of salmonids, and then also, I mean, we've actually seen the bear. There was a young bear last fall, and bobcats also been spotted there. So it's a really valuable corridor. I also have to mention there's an endangered little fish that lives there too, the Nooksack dace. So this is a remnant from the Pleistocene Ice Age. It's about 15 centimeters long, and it's, as you can guess, it's reliant on good water quality. So there's 4 populations in all of Canada, and 2 of them are in the Brunette, including right where TMX, or Trans Mountain Expansion, is building a staging area, which was actually authorized by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in 2020. We could talk a lot about the Nooksack dace, but we won't, not tonight, because we're going to focus on the forested corridor to the west. So just for a bit of context, In August 2020, a tree sit was established in the Brunette corridor by a grassroots coalition called Protect the Planet. And the goal was very simple: to slow deforestation and to stop construction on segment 7. Beautiful giant cottonwoods that you can see. This was the second tree house. There were several tree houses built as part of this tree occupation, which lasted over 400 days. So it started in August 2020. And as said, the aim was basically to delay construction, but also to clarify the misinformation of this conflicted project. Also, muzzled media. So the media doesn't really cover anything on Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline unless there's arrests associated with it. So this was a way to just try to get that information out, that this is actually happening in running right past schools, and that people don't even know this. So the tree sit united so many people and groups: artists, biologists, neighbors, NGOs, people of faith, students, and so on. And the coalition is strongly committed to allyship with First Nations and guided by host nations. So this particular site along the Brunette corridor was Katsi territory, and we always consulted with Chief Rhonda Larrabee on everything that we did, just to make sure that that was that she knew what was going on and that we had her blessing. But we really valued our collaborative relationship with the First Nations people, and are grateful for their guidance and support. So now we're kind of getting to the crux of the story. In January 2021, this is then the third tree sit. This is Little Lost Creek, which you can just make out in the spring flush. That's actually Highway 1 behind in the distance. So in January 2021, the tree sit's kind of holding the space, but tree cutting was still continuing in the corridor. And the tree sit team, which of course includes those in the trees as well as those supplying the tree sitters, coming every day with food and supplies. So that team noticed hummingbirds demonstrating courtship behavior. And so we started wondering, well, could nesting birds maybe help protect the forest? Because surely there are laws that are in favor of species rights and the rights of nesting birds. So this became even more urgent in February 2021, when the Trans Mountain Expansion project was granted exemption from Burnaby city bylaws. So the Canada Energy Regulator gave TMX the approval to cut over 1,300 large trees. So those are trees greater than 20 centimeters diameter at breast height, without city permits. So this felt like a real affront, and many people were really upset by this. This is just one of several occasions where Burnaby municipal bylaws were completely flattened by federal paramountcy, which is the language of, this is an important project and your rules, our rules override your laws, basically. So a lot of people did not like this. And I think, Sarah, maybe you want to share into the chat. There's an artist response called 1308 Trees, to write love letters to trees, which is a really beautiful expression. So as we said, there were birds obviously nesting in the area. Then the clear cutting really started, it was proceeding quite quickly. So this prompted the establishment of the Community Nest Finding Network. Citizen observers conducted dawn surveys in the path of logging. The challenge, of course, to find and establish evidence of disruption to nesting before it was too late. So I'm not going to say what these birds are because I think you probably all know. I'm just going to swip through some of the nesting birds in the area. Okay, I'll say it. Song sparrows, pileated woodpeckers, and their babies. Bush tits. This is on a mahonia, and that's a bush tit nest. Brown creeper building a nest. There's a brown creeper nest. northern flicker, black-capped chickadee. That's a baby robin. This is sort of like the visual tastiness. And of course, Anna's hummingbird. So this brings us to the question, okay, well, what can we actually use? So we look to the policy. Basically, we would use whatever mechanisms that could protect nesting birds, whether it was provincial or federal legislation. So huge tribute to all the research that went into this. It was not I was not involved directly in this. I'm not going to read all of this. Let's just say that the BC Wildlife Act seemed a good place to start. So yeah, okay, raptors are protected year round, blah, blah, blah. There are exemptions, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line, the nests of common songbirds have no protection under provincial legislation. Okay, what about federal? So then we come to the Migratory Birds Convention Act. This was established, I think it was 1914, and we're working with the 1994 amendment. And so Migratory Birds Convention Act, or MBCA, regulates human activities that may be harmful to migratory birds by enforcing the Migratory Birds Regulation. So enforcement, that's what we're looking for. This is an international treaty, so actually established between Canada and the United States. And under this act, it is prohibited to destroy or disturb an active bird nest. So the general nesting period is defined as per the region, and that's when enforcement occurs. So it was deduced that the location of active nests would be a powerful tool that citizen observers could use. So from the regulations, there's a whole process that is required if a migratory bird's nest is discovered. And of course, this has to do with generally with industrial activity or development activity. Basically, if there are birds' nests where you plan work, anything that could disturb or destroy nests should be avoided, adapted, rescheduled, or relocated. So the Act discourages direct nest surveys because of the risk of disturbance, and it recommends general surveys using different tools. And there's a whole process. So after a nest is reported, the first action is to put a buffer up. Bless you. And after notifying the authorities, who then notify project contractors, citizens are responsible to follow up on the actions taken to ensure that the required actions are carried out and that the actions are sufficient to protect the nest. So I'm providing this now, it's a bit dry, but this is sort of like the background, and we will return to this later in the story. So basically there's two regulations that implement the MBCA. I won't go into any detail. Also worth noting that migratory birds might also be protected by other laws, such as the Species at Risk Act, SARA, or provincial or territorial law. So it was decided this was our tool. So the Community Nest Finding Network prioritized Anna's hummingbird for two reasons. One is this species is listed under the MBCA, which is enforced. So that's a bonus right there. The second reason is that they nest very early, and they were in the forest in February building nests. This is what we needed if we want to stop tree clearing. So it's funny that it's still listed because actually the Anna's has been breeding in southern BC since about 1986. So I guess we're very fortunate that that bit of bureaucracy hasn't been updated yet. But you can see they're very much at the northern extent of their range here. And of course, why are they breeding here? Because of all the sugar water that we humans provide them. Works for us. Okay, so the materials and methods. This is sort of like the meat of the subject. So obviously for materials, it was all about resources and preparing for the work. Sarah, I'm trying to remember where you were going to come in.
Not quite yet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. So yeah, lots of great resources out there to understand how these little birds operate. These are the pictures of the hummingbird doing one of those J dive courtship flights. With regards to the behavior and biology, so Anna's hummingbirds start breeding very early, and they continue through June, often with multiple broods per season. Males may hold small feeding territories before the breeding period begins, and within the same area, there may be multiple females. So there's overlap in both time and space. Now we're just going to go into some of the interesting biology of the Anna's hummingbird. So with regards to the site, so the female chooses the nest site after she's located and starts defending a nearby nectar source. As we all know, hummingbirds can be very defensive about their nectar sources. Yeah, so potential nest sites can be discerned just from observing this behavior. So for example, a female will fly to a branch that's actually much too large to perch on, and she'll hover just above the surface, touching down several times as she makes 360-degree flights over the spot. I believe Sarah has actually observed this, right? Yeah. So the bird repeats this process at several other sites, and within 1 or 2 days, the female will begin to build a nest at one of these sites. So that's from Birds of the World. So local observations were substantiated by the literature that females will often nest close to a previous nest. So that's the nest site. What about the site characteristics? You know, if we're actually looking for nests, what do we look for? Well, Anna's is actually quite a flexible and a pragmatic nester. So the nest is usually placed on a horizontal surface of a twig or a branch, often where 2 twigs join, as in this really sweet picture. The nests are typically 2 to 6 meters above the ground, but they can be much higher. They can be 15 to 20 meters high. And a crucial point is that the nest may be close to areas of high human activity. So in the built environment, they may be under porches or in shrubs beside the sidewalk. This will come up again later in the story. Yeah, so in the Brunette corridor, Annas were actually observed sitting on their nests very close to tree cutting. Most of these nests were found in alders and other deciduous plants. And I think this is probably a picture that Sarah took with her camera binocular combo. Yeah. Okay, back to the biology. So nest construction, things to look for in the actual construction of the nest. So site location, construction, incubation, and feeding of the young is done solely by the females. So they are super mama, they don't need the male at all. The nest build involves alternating trips between plant down and spider webs. And actually this source describes quite specifically 2 to 3 trips of plant down and then 2 trips of spider web. And there's a sort of, a very defined rhythm to this harvesting of material. So obviously keeping our eyes open for this sort of behavior. And in fact, if you can get photo documentation of a hummingbird with spider gossamer cobwebs on their beaks, that may be sufficient evidence to establish nesting in an area. This picture is so cute, is it not? And you just see the beginning of a nest underneath this female. So she's actively using that gossamer to form and shape and bind her little super tiny nest. Yeah, so nest construction, this is the next biology piece. So many words, so maybe just close your eyes because it's just so amazing. So the side and the rim, as we saw, are developed as the female sits in the nest. She pushes nest material with her breast while turning frequently. And of course, she'll be binding it with that gossamer. She's a hard worker, starts early morning, continues actively until late afternoon. But sometimes it can go all day, depending on the weather. The time to build a nest varies from a few days to over a month. One study said it was an average of 7 days. Again, weather will influence it as well. And this is pretty amazing. The female may actually begin incubating eggs before even finishing construction. It's like she's on a mission. Anyway, so the implications for nest finding and protection, given that construction and incubation may happen quickly, again, without the nest even being finished, as soon as a female displays nest searching behavior, it is worth monitoring intensively. Ideally, we want to find the nest and protect it immediately. This is another image from Sarah from the Community Nest Finding Network. Okay, now probably the cutest part, the dimensions. So the nest is hemispherical. The outside diameter under 2 inches. So just measure that out right now, yeah? That's 3.8 to 4.4 centimeters. The inside is 1 inch. The outer height is 3.2 to 4.1 centimeters. Inside depth, under 2 centimeters. Tiny. Actually, I mean, if you don't have a ruler out just now, it's, I mean, they're tiny. This is, okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Tiny little birds. Okay, I think we're coming to the end of the biology. So there's that tiny little nest with 2 little birds inside it. So the structure and composition matter is pretty fascinating. Like, how is something so small able to actually have growing babies inside it? So the binding materials, as mentioned, is mostly spider webs and insect cocoon fibers. So any sort of silk, but also fibrous plant material and rodent hairs. So the spider silk is sort of that key thing that gives the nest both strength and flexibility so it can stretch as the young chicks grow. And I know this is not unique to hummingbirds, but it's so beautiful. Yeah, so the inner cup is lined loosely with downy material. So that's, coming from like typha, coming from, typha, cattail, or that kind of down material. The walls are made of also downy material like cattail, willow, the underside of fuzzy leaves, thistle flowers, small feathers. It's usually ornamented on the outside with bits of lichens, mosses, and dead leaves. That could be for camouflage. And these authors also observed nest materials may be stolen from another hummingbird's nest. There's that cute nest again. Okay. Okay, Sarah, I think this is you, hey? Should I pass it over to you?
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best here to share some things with you about nest finding. Yeah, and this is a photo actually of the first nest that we found in the Brunette corridor. And this one was, so you can imagine that size, it's less than 4 centimeters in diameter. And this one was 40 feet up in an alder tree. And we found it, which is like more extreme than a needle in a haystack. In that area, there was a lot of hummingbirds nesting in this area, probably because of the quality of the vegetation that was there. It was, osoberry, which is little wild plum, or some call it Indian plum. And my son is knocking at my door. Also salmonberry in the area. And there weren't a lot of humans until Trans Mountain came along and the tree sitters. So it was like this amazing fragment of forest, corridor of forest. So most of the nests we saw were lower down though. So like around 8 feet or a bit higher. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, great. So with the Community Nest Finding Network, I think the thing that made us successful in this work was the attitude that we brought to the nest finding work. So, I grew up as a birder, and my parents they had me on their back when they were birding. Like I was born into it, but it was a different kind of birding that we did. As the binos up, you see the species, you watch it for a bit, you check it off your list, you go on to the next thing. Whereas the Nest Finding Network, we really approach it. It's like a place of really deep, profound humility, where we honor the fact that we're going into this area where there are mamas, taking care of raising their babies. And it's like a very special place, which is not our place. So the very first thing when we do a training is sharing this belief that, the most important thing is that we do no harm in this situation, which means being really aware of our impact in the forest around us. It's so important to, check the disturbance that you may be causing. So nest finding, so a 4-centimeter nest, the way to find it is not with your binoculars, it's with your other senses. And for sure, the number one sense we used was sound, was hearing, because you can hear, the female actually vocalizes around her nest. She does the Annas do this like, and it has a different quality depending on what they're trying to communicate. If they're in a territory thing, they'll be, you hear them chasing other birds like that. But the female, when she comes to her nest, she does this quiet little, and then she settles on her nest. So you can like hear it. If your hearing is good, you can hear that. So yeah, hearing was our number one sense. Actually, can you just go back for a sec, Christine? I just want to make sure that there's some things on here. Yeah, so we were going out in the morning before light, and partly that was just because there was active work in the area, and so we wanted to be there and not be seen. But this piece about being really carefully when you're walking, you're not just, you're like really slowly walking, and all your senses are alert. Yeah, okay, you can go to the next one. We do pay attention to like alarming birds. So for example, some of you may be familiar with this. I'm guessing lots of you are actually. If you go close to a song sparrow's, habitat, they'll start chipping at you. And it's like, it's an agitated kind of sound. And likewise with the hummingbirds too, if you go too close to them, they'll start making sounds. So as we were moving through the forest, we would be listening and making sure that we weren't going too close. And mostly we would sit. So, and that was how we found the first nest, was we all spread out. There were, I think, 5 of us the first time we went out, and we spread out and all just sat down, and, we did a 20 or 30 minute sit. We just sat there watching and looking. One of my colleagues, I think it was the second day we were out, she said, I think I see something. She texted, we were texting each other. I think I see something. There's a bird that's returned to the same place. And so we reoriented where we were sitting so that we were spread out, but concentrated in the area where she'd seen the bird, so that we could, have more eyes and ears on the situation. And then some other little tips here, this idea of side watching. So instead of being full frontal on the bird, make your body thin and just kind of look sideways. And it also has the impact of like, I think birds can sense when we're hunting them. If we're like really like trying to get them, then or like sneaky. They don't like sneaky either, because it's stress. Birds can read our language and our intention. So I think if we're sort of calm and aware and sort of looking at them sideways, then it's just it brings the right attitude. And I'll share this too. I also, when we were in the forest, the birds would come up to us, and the hummers would come up to us and they would come right up to me, because I'd be sitting there. And part of that is when you're sitting there, they become used to you, and they're not worried anymore. They just come right up. And so they would come right up, and I was able to say, like, show us your nest. We're here to protect you if you show us. And so whether or not you feel we can communicate, I felt like I could. So yeah. Oh yeah. So, and where I studied bird language actually with John Young, who's some of you may be familiar with his work, and this is his book, What the Robin Knows. And he's popularized the idea of bird language. And the 3 practice exercises, or like owl eyes, is where you, rather than using your like hunter's focused vision, you expand your vision. So you're doing wide, you can see any movement within a wide range. That's called owl eyes. And then deer ears I think I freaked some of the Trans Mountain security out using deer ears, because it's a directional hearing where you can cup your fingers behind your ear, pull your ears forward a little bit, and that way you can see the direction that a sound is coming from, as if you're imitating deer and the way that they turn their ears to what they're paying attention to, and it really works. So I was doing that in the forest, and the Trans Mountain security is, "Are you okay? Are you?" "I'm fine. I'm just listening." So yeah, but we really did use hearing a lot. So I recommend this book. It's fantastic. It's really like takes you to another level of because the birds are all communicating between, like within their species, but also between species. And so that's why when you start understanding what the alarm sounds are like with different birds, you can start like knowing what's coming. You can know before the Cooper's hawk arrives that it's on its way because of what the sound is like. You can know when there's like a ground cat coming, or the more you pay attention to this bird sounds. Anyway, I love it. I think next slide. Yeah. Christine, do you want me to keep going, or do you want to take over again? I'll say this one. Okay. Is that okay? So yeah, Environment and Climate Change Canada does not advocate actually doing nest surveys during nesting season. The Community Nest Finding Network, we did do nesting surveys because we were primarily surveying for hummingbirds who are very tolerant, and also because of what's at stake with this project, we felt that nesting surveys were appropriate. Also, I will add, we're not just tromping through the bush. We are sitting very carefully and quietly. It's a different methodology from what the standard nest finding would be for a registered professional biologist. So I've already covered some of this. Just Anna's is quite a tolerant nester. And when we're doing nest finding, we also don't want to approach the nest directly. I think this may be covered on another slide as well, but we don't want to disturb them, because they'll, if the adults fledge from the nest, especially in cold, rainy weather, you can really harm the success of the eggs. And that's not what we're after. But we didn't ever do any locating for ground nesting birds. We got photos of song sparrows and towhees and robins in the nesting in the Brunette corridor with, nesting material in their beaks. And that is enough of a marker that they're breeding in the area. But we never went into the bushes and we're like, "Where's that song sparrow nest? I need a picture." We never did that because I think it would have, I think we didn't need to be that invasive in this case. The hummingbirds there were so many hummingbirds in there. And actually, I only once saw a male in that whole area, but there must have been 12, 15 females in that one territory. So, or maybe probably more than we saw. Christine, I think I'm going to hand it back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah.
For a bit, yeah.
So, so obviously Sarah's kind of touched on the risks and benefits, the risks and how the Community Nest Finding Network validated its work. Of course, those are the benefits. Protecting the nest will increase breeding success, and we were looking at imminent habitat destruction, so it was considered a benefit if we could stop the destruction. Obviously, that means more generations. And of course, let us not forget that climate change is one of the biggest threats to birds and all species on this beautiful planet. So if we can actually cancel harmful projects like this expansion of the tar sands, then so much the better. So that's a benefit. A really important method as well, I think this was Sarah's special superpower, her rigor on documentation was so important. So anyone that's wanting to get into this kind of work, there's definitely a sort of a rigor that is required. Good notes are crucially important given the legal significance of the work. So I won't go into the details here, but you can imagine what this means: the date, the time, height off the ground, all these details. And of course, when you find a nest, well, there's all these different things. So part of this documentation is recording the GPS. The photos are really important as well. That's where a spotting scope is ideal, but you can also take excellent photos through binoculars. I think a lot of Sarah's greatest pictures were done that way. Oops. And of course, there's also bird camera. Yeah, don't get too close to the nest, as Sarah's already kind of covered. And yeah, and any findings can be reported to the Community Nest Finding Network. So let's go to the adventure. This was all the premise for what then actually happened. So Community Nest Finding Network decided that it would begin monitoring this segment 7, around the Lost Creek tree sit towards the end of February 2021. So there was active cutting in the area. And hooray, on March 15th, the first successful documentation of an active Anna's hummingbird in the cutting area was submitted. So it took 3 early morning sessions, multiple people, and additional investigations at other times. And this is one of those photos. Sadhu.
Start time? Oops.
What was that?
Sorry, ignore me.
Okay. Okay, so once it was confirmed, like without a doubt, there's a female on and off the nest sitting on eggs. Sarah called the conservation officer, who she'd already been in touch with. They were waiting for the call. The officer came immediately and they went to the site. So this is an image of actually walking in with, I guess, with Trans Mountain Security as well. So the conservation officer documented the nest for their own records, and this set that process in motion. So I believe this is Sarah with the 2 officers. Oh, and her son is there too, and they're basically a good distance from the site as well. But that's so that record was then filed. The buffer was set up around the nest tree. Yeah, so it was protected from the tree cutting.
And incidentally, the buffer they set up for the Anna's hummingbird is only about 5 meters. So that the size of the buffer is set by the professional biologist.
And wasn't it supposed to be 30 meters though?
It's to the discretion of the biologist. So 30 meters is what they recommend, but it's for Anna's, it doesn't need to be that big.
Okay, because they're so tall.
Sadly.
Right. Well, of course, that had consequences, that small buffer. The tree clearing continued using heavy machinery. And so Community Nest Finding Network noted a nest at the western edge lacking a buffer.
Yeah, I just need to talk about this picture here. Can you see the bird up in the top there, the little Anna's? If you followed the branch that she's on down, you can see it's broken at the bottom. That was the result of the use of their heavy machinery, their excavator. So amazingly, she was still on her nest, even though the branch that she was in had been broken and caught by another bush. So it was that seeing that was enough, and documenting that, you can see it's like an early morning shot. I was like, oh my gosh, we need to call the officers right now from Environment Canada, because this is a clear violation. And I think if it had just been like this and they had come, they would have said, well, she's still in the nest. But what happened when I phoned them and called them in, I don't know what your next slide is. Yeah. So what happened when we called them is they came immediately, and there were 2 officers that came from Environment and Climate Change Canada. They came and met me. They were only willing to have me go in with them because it was really important that they weren't seen to be that I wasn't like influencing them. So I was just to show them where the nest was. And when we walked in, and when we got to the site, we could hear the chainsaws in the background. And we got closer and closer to them, and it was stressful, and you know, like chainsaws, you don't want to be near them. And when we got in close to the site, the registered professional biologist for Trans Mountain was actually there on site at that moment. And so the officers started speaking with him, and I was looking and could see the area where that nest in the previous slide was. I knew where that nest was. I knew that land intimately from having sat there and been there for so many times. And I could see that the cutter was working right there. And I said, he's working right in the area where she is. And then at that moment, we looked over, a tree fell down, and the officer said, stop the work. And we walked over and found a smashed nest right there. So it was like, the conditions gives me shivers to really think about it, because it's like a needle in a haystack. It's the idea that we could find to be there at that time with the people that were there to witness this horrible thing happen. Just, it's a very unbelievable story. Yeah.
I'm so glad you could tell it now.
Yeah. Stop work, he said. I was like, oh.
Stop work. Those magical words in this case.
Yeah.
Well, they did stop work. So yeah, tree cutting was halted. So Burnaby Now published a piece. We hosted a press conference, really great press conference. You can see Chief Judy Wilson there with sisters behind. There's Sarah and Donna Clark. This is Eugene Kung from West Coast Environmental Law, all speaking about Trans Mountain's reckless disregard for biodiversity. And of course, here's this beautiful sign from George Rammel as well. So yeah, got some coverage, which was amazing in itself. We even got coverage in The Guardian. Not only that, we broke the language barrier and got into El País, which is one of the biggest Spanish-speaking periodicals. And yet, things were only just warming up. So in late May, a black-capped chickadee nest was documented within an active TMX work site, also in the Brunette corridor, and again, lacking adequate buffer. So this was again reported by Community Nest Finding Network. And this was the tipping point. A couple days later, the Canada Energy Regulator issued a stop work order for the entire route, restricting specifically clearing activities across the project, tree clearing and mowing. The entire 1,000 plus kilometer length was put on pause. Trans Mountain said, oh, it was no nests, no birds were injured, blah, blah. It was something else. But what Community Nest Finding Network is quoted as saying, actually I think it was Donna Clark. Yeah, we're not sure how long, the stop work order will go on for. The concluding statement, this pipeline will never be finished. I just wanted to highlight that because it was so plucky. So closing in, outcome and lessons learned. Well, Community Nest Finding Network managed to get 2 stop work orders. The first one was protecting Brunette corridor all summer. That whole summer, no chainsaws. It was beautiful. And of course, the entire project was stopped for a few weeks. Eventually, it did start up in the other segments, but at the very least, it was a huge, almost like a hemorrhaging to this project. Actually, Community Nest Finding Network, so Sarah and Donna went on a road trip up the route all the way to Jasper in May to just kind of check out the sites, meet landowners, First Nations, other communities. And I guess it was pretty hard going. It's hard to see beautiful forests and streams plowed over. So there might be the obvious question of like, well, why did citizen observers find nests, but the RP bios didn't? So couple quick answers. Sarah already alluded to the unique frequency of the birds. So yeah, that might not be audible to some. Some people might not be able to hear those frequencies. perhaps RP bios might not be able to hear those things, or at least those who are hired by Trans Mountain. But for the benefit of the doubt, the RP bios hired by Trans Mountain, they were tasked with observing a large area in a very small amount of time. So they would do 3 surveys over 5 days, after which the company could cut trees for 7 days. So that was that was quite a lot of space to cover in a short time. Community Nest Finding Network used spacious time and observation to locate nests. So very different sort of mission orientation. So to close the story, the summer was free of chainsaws, and of course that had to end at some point, and it did end in September. So tree cutting resumed. Nothing really happened to the tree sit until after the federal election. So after the federal election, the RCMP moved in and basically surrounded the Lost Creek tree sit with blue fence, and eventually after 4 weeks and 6 arrests, that tree sit was dismantled. So this, the image on the left is Catherine Hembling, who was one of the Brunette 6. She almost turned 80 on her 2-week jail sentence, but she actually came out the day before. I just thought I'd include a picture of Big Bird. So Bill Winder, who just came out of his 21-day sentence from that September sentencing. He was in one of these sky pods for over 7 days. He got quite a harsh sentence because his extraction was quite difficult. So you'll see the RCMP are in there with their tactical gear, the green men as we call them. And I just put this image in to give a sense of like what this tree sit did for the forest. It really was like, it was like a bottleneck. Jim, I see you've got your hand up. Did you have a question or we'll just keep going. Yeah, so 6 people were arrested. I want to include this op-ed that we published in the Vancouver Sun, which Ruth Walmsley spearheaded. I think Ruth is here tonight. She was among the 6, so that's Ruth and Catherine, that's actually me there, blocking the habitat destruction for the Nooksack dace in that meadow beside the Brunette River. And this is kind of where the story ends. You may have heard we just got the new cost estimate. The cost has soared 70% to 21.4 billion. We're all on the hook because we are basically the owners of this. Yeah, but to go back to the actual, so I'm just going to wrap it up properly. Thanks, Sarah. So what can we learn from this story? Well, we can learn that environmental monitoring may be insufficient to protect species affected by major industrial projects, and that citizen observation can make up for the gaps. We also learned that the authorities do respond when evidence is presented, and persistence by knowledgeable citizens is required to enforce regulations. So there's no such thing as armchair activism anymore. Although actually, there's still a place for that too. So these last few slides, I think it's 2 slides. If you're feeling at all moved, well, we just wanted to extol the fact that the best antidote to feeling disempowered and feeling overwhelmed is action, and the fact that working together with others feels great. And just to say, we are alive at one of the most crucial times and places. There are many ways that we can stop the path of destruction for this dirtiest fuel on the planet. And if you really look at it, the diluted bitumen coming out of the tar sands has the highest carbon expense, and really is, it should stay where it is. So we do need everyone to care. And for those who do care and who enjoy the natural world, well, this is best expressed through words and action. So if you happen to be interested, or someone you know might be interested in finding nests, well, the fact is, when we talked about putting this presentation together, we thought maybe we could recruit some really keen-eyed birders to help. But the fact is, probably the Lower Mainland is kind of done. Trans Mountain plans to have everything cut by March, basically to avoid this issue. There may be sites beyond the lower mainland with standing trees and nesting habitat, but we actually lack the capacity for the degree of surveillance required for monitoring. That being said, so if you or someone you know has the capacity for nest finding in the Fraser Valley, Community Nest Finding Network, or Sarah, is happy to offer training, but there is a requirement. So there would be map reading skills and a commitment of probably 20 hours per week minimum for the next 3 months. So yeah, if you're interested, there's the email. Please get in touch. And then for all of us here, there's a couple of things we can do. So there's a bunch of big petitions right now. So there's 3 that are collecting names. So this is on the stoptmx.ca website. There's actually a page called Letters and Petitions. So please add your name and share it with your network and family. So that's one thing that each of us can do. And you know what? I just thought I'm going to put in the Roberts Bank Terminal 2 update as well. So there's still time for letters to be submitted for that as well. And of course, that's connected right off of the Nature Vancouver website. And I think that's a wrap. So thank you so much for your interest and for hosting, and we'd love to take questions.
And I just want to say one more thing about the nest finding, if you're interested in volunteering. As Maureen mentioned, we have been keeping our eyes on a couple of spots in Burnaby, and there would be space if you're interested in monitoring a spot in Burnaby in the very short term, though, because we don't know how long those are going to stay. The trees will stay standing in those spots, but you could speak to either Maureen or I about that. And then when saying within the lower mainland, I mean, there still are trees along the route in Surrey and Langley. So that kind of region, which I guess is Fraser Valley, but anyway, that's the region where we would, if anyone has passion in those regions, we could look to setting up something there, but it would be because we're based in Burnaby, it's kind of far to go. And I think the nest finding sounds like it is really excellent. It's like, as bird watching is, it's a enlivening and connecting activity. But the thing that makes it like in this way kind of activist is that we need to know the precise conditions of the work that is being done by Trans Mountain or by any other company, but you need to know like what day are they cutting where, and then you have to be surveying that area. And so there's a lot of groundwork that goes into being at the right place and time. That's the hardest part. That's 95% of the work. The nest finding is just like the icing. So it's important to understand that context. And yeah, thank you, Christine. Thank you everyone for being here.
This is amazing. Such empowering work, and we all thank you for your work. I just want to ask anybody with questions to unmute yourself or put it in the text, and Christine and Sarah and Maureen will get to them.
Sarah, can you hear me, Sarah?
Yes.
Hi, I'm just wanting to know what the current situation is, say, in the Brunette corridor. I know you want to expand beyond that, but are you still fighting for protection in the Brunette corridor, or are you having to refight it again this year like you did last year successfully, or what's the status for that particular corridor?
Yeah, sadly, the trees have all been cut in that area. So, and now they're working on the Stony Creek Greenway. They're cutting there, and that's the next site. It's right by Burnaby Mountain Secondary School as well. Yeah, that's where they're working now. And then there are two more little parcels left in Burnaby that they haven't yet cut. And so yeah, we have our eyes on those, but and so that's what Maureen has been helping with, and as well as some others. We've been doing a couple of trainings, and we for sure would be willing to do another training, but it's because we have only a couple of weeks left, and you know, the nest finding, like the chickadee nest that stopped the pipeline, I had to get up at 3:45 in the morning, and there wasn't anyone with me because who else was going to come? It wasn't planned. We couldn't be like, okay, next Friday we're going to go to the place. It's like you get the information that the cutting is starting in a certain place, and you go out and you already know the terrain and you know where you need to be at the time at 3:45 in the morning. That was June.
So you're
way better to start now because you don't have to get up so early.
It's what I'm getting at is it sounds like your observations that are critical for the conservation officer to come in and shut it down is only good for 1 year. And then you got to start all over again this year. So even though that you said there was maybe 10 or 15, whatever it was, I mean, even 10 would be a lot in a small area like that. It's a high nest density, but that's only good for 1 year for the.
It's only good until they cut the trees. So all those trees are gone that they were
once nesting season's over, they can cut the trees down. Then
that's right.
Then basically, I'm not trying to be negative, but it sounds like you've got to start all over again this year.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, and we have to find different places to do it. So,
wow.
And that's why they're pushing so hard to get the clearing work done by March 24th, I think, which is the day that a nesting season officially opens. However, nests are protected anytime. So nests are protected before that period starts. They're always protected. So just the frequency of nesting increases at the end of March. And so that means there's legal obligations for the company. If they're going to be cutting in the end of March and into April, they have to do these biology sweeps 3 out of 5 days, and then they have 7 days to cut. So that's the practice. That's what gives them, that's called their due diligence that they have to do to show that they're doing that. Before, in mid-March, they don't have to do that. They can just cut. They don't need to worry about nests.
So even though it's been proven, I know here in Coquitlam, it's been proven that there's hummingbird nests, or they're laying eggs by February 15th. So they still have that time period that they can cut, even though it's been proven without a doubt whatsoever that birds will start laying their eggs. At least in Coquitlam, we've got visual proof of that.
Yeah. February
15th, eggs in the nest, but they could still keep cutting into March.
That's right. Yeah. Wow. And so what it speaks to, that makes me think that we should be shifting the window to reflect the rising prevalence of nesting Anna's hummingbirds in this region that are such early nesters. And we saw there was an Anna's on the nest December 19th.
Wow.
Yeah, they start right away. The cold snap happened right after that. So we're guessing that they abandoned those initial nests. And yeah, it was more like what you're talking about, February 15th. Yeah. Because
I know it was about 3 years ago, the mayor of Coquitlam, you don't get a much higher authority than that locally. The mayor of Coquitlam got a picture of a female Anna's hummingbird with 2 little tic-tac eggs in her nest on February 15th. No doubt about it, proof.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
They just have their due diligence they have to do.
Wow.
Starting in the end of March. Yeah.
So just to reinforce, I think what Sarah said is they don't have to start doing their due diligence till the end of March. But if we find a nest, and you can say, here it is, right here, right now, documentation, come on out, then that protection can kick in immediately. But it's just, no one's even looking for it officially unless we find it. And if we find one tomorrow in the cutting zone, then there would be protection for it.
Well, my last question would be, or my second last question would be, now that you know that the nesting period starts mid-January, for those eggs to be laid by February 15th, for example, in that case in Coquitlam, the eggs would have had to be laid, what, about 16, 17 days before that? So that we're talking about the end of January. Have you had any success in trying to get them to back up the permittable cutting period from mid-March to mid-January? Like, what efforts have been made in that regard? I don't mean you to criticize you, but has anybody tried or had any success?
Not to my knowledge, but that would be a fabulous initiative. Yeah.
Well, my reading of the Migratory Bird Convention, which is pretty shallow in my reading, but it seemed to say that the time periods vary depending a little bit on location, and recognizes nesting as later at high elevations, but it specifically mentions, I think, southwestern BC with some species. So it may not, I mean, that might be a thing that we could put a little pressure on. Someone could on TMX to actually, through Environment Climate Change Canada, to actually at least start doing their surveys earlier. But again, there's what's the quality of their surveys going to be if they're not really highly motivated to find the nests? I think it really comes back to us as citizens. So anybody wants to come looking with us, boy, I know there's a lot of great skills in Nature Vancouver, so love to have you. And I know you guys get up early too, guys and gals. Yeah. So earlier than me, I'll bring the coffee.
Yes, I want to speak to the conditions that we're working in too, you know, because the tree sit was kind of edgy, you know, you actually had to, like, there was security around and you had to be careful about where you were. It wasn't for everyone. But the places that we're surveying now are different than that. They're not private property. And there's one site that we're monitoring that does have blue fencing up, but they haven't started cutting yet. So you're outside the fencing and looking in. So there's no risk to doing this work in terms of like trespass or injunctions or anything like that that are associated with the pipeline.
Do you feel that the next time you find a nest, it will be easier now that you have clearly established your credibility in nest finding and what it achieved in terms of delaying a TMX? I would think that the next time you're not, hopefully not going to have as difficult a time convincing Environment Canada or the provincial wildlife conservation officers. Do you think that's probably?
Well, we have relations developed now, you know, so that would be helpful. But I don't think we didn't have any trouble convincing them. They were impartial, and so they saw the quality of our efforts and understood what we were doing, and they were really good to us and responded, and the timing worked out really well. And
my last question would be provincial authorities versus federal authorities, because I know that you had the federal authorities in there under the Canadian Migratory Bird Act, right?
We had the provincial ones in too.
Were they there?
They came first.
Oh, did they?
They came first, yeah. And I don't exactly understand it all, because they came and documented and we were excited, and then we're like, but you don't have any authority for this. So I think he might have been a bit embarrassed too, actually. But that was just as we were finding our way, you know, but it did give us the credibility. So when we did go to the federal authorities, they knew. Yeah.
Okay, well, my one concern is that, I mean, I'm quite familiar with the Anna's hummingbird. That's why we put the Anna's hummingbird on our cover of our Birder's Guide to Vancouver in 2016, because it's here all year, which means it's more likely to be covered under the Provincial Act than the Migratory Bird Act. Yeah, but the Rufous hummingbird is definitely covered under the Migratory Bird Act because they are definitely migratory, but I guess we don't want to say that too loudly, eh?
And it's, you know, it is, the Anna's is resident year-round in a very small part of this region, I think. And I think it's, you know, relating to urban centers and the, you know, plantings and bird feeders, as we've discussed. Mm-hmm. But my guess is that they would be migratory beyond that. And so it's just a tiny little pocket where there's residents all year. Yeah. But I agree with you that it's an area where the legislation maybe hasn't caught up.
Yeah, I just didn't know whether the federal officers would have brought that particular technicality up. Not that we want them to. Don't want them to.
There's an interesting piece, which is that the federal officer is just there to enforce, and required a professional biologist to consult, to do the actual observation and confirmation. So that was interesting.
Thanks.
The federal officer was like, no comment about a lot of things. Yeah. And I'll share too that we have been approached, the Nest Finding Network has been approached by several different groups, and One of them was the municipality of Lions Bay, who is working to define their community as a bird-friendly community. And we're looking at ways to mitigate some of the private tree cutting that is happening during nesting season in the municipality. So that was a really interesting chance for us to expand a little bit and think about some different issues. And likewise, we were asked to consult on, there's a revision to the Migratory Bird Convention Act right now going on. So we were asked to support some of that work. And then we were also, several indigenous nations asked us for help. And so did Fairy Creek. And so did the folks up fighting the Coastal GasLink and the Wet'suwet'en struggle. Also, everyone was wondering, like, because of the amount of hope that this hummingbird brought in this vast struggle, you know, people's hearts woke up and they're like, there's hope, there's possibility, we can do something. And so we were pretty hot for a while there, trying to support the development of networks provincially. And ultimately, like, the question of habitat loss and protection for birds. I mean, I can imagine way more robust application of this law where you could see no industrial development in breeding season for birds. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? But then also birds return to the same place the next year. So we can also imagine a world where we honor that birds and all creatures need homes, and you don't destroy a home even when the people are, or the creature isn't there, because you know the creature is going to come back. So,
well, that's what I was wondering about the federal officers, when they know that area, looking at the Brunette River corridor right now, for example, it's got a high density of Anna's hummingbird nests. So I don't quite understand why they would allow it the cutting to continue the next year when they know it has that high density every year.
Yeah, and I think that it's just because there's this old protection on the books that is like, oh, but the baby birds, it just wants to protect the baby, with the idea that once the baby's fledged, they have the capacity to move to a different place and ensure their survival in a new area. But that doesn't recognize the truth of it, which is that if you have a habitat, then there's going to be the associated species that belong to that habitat. Yeah. And if you get rid of the habitat, all those associated species, maybe they can find somewhere else to go, but maybe they just don't have as great a chance of surviving because that place that they needed and they were connected to doesn't exist anymore.
Could I throw in another question for you, Sarah? We talked briefly about colony farms, and you had said that you thought that area probably didn't have any more, like the cuttings either been done, or you just didn't see that there was necessarily opportunity on that site. Is there anywhere maybe in Coquitlam that's near the route? You did mention Langley, where we're not connected with volunteers at the moment in Langley, but anything around Coquitlam that is part of the route that is still not cut that you're aware of?
Yeah, there actually is one spot in Coquitlam, and but it's a bit hard to access. You have to cross the train tracks off of a highway overpass, like off ramp. But it's kind of tragic, actually, as many of these stories are. It's painted turtle habitat, and they're talking about cutting the edge forest along a marsh. Like they're going to cut like all the trees in the edge of the marsh. It just breaks my heart. So that's another area that could be monitored. Sarah,
would you mind emailing me that, because I live in Coquitlam? I'd be interested in that one.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I'd love to go there with you and show you where it is.
Yeah, because we don't want to take time talking about it right now, but if you could email me privately, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. That's a place that's close to my heart.
Thank you.
But there's definitely trees in Surrey and beyond, a lot of that, because they know we're not watching out there, you know?
Yeah.
I see Sheila has a hand.
Yes, great presentation by all of you. Thanks very much. It's more than I was aware of, and that makes me smile in the sense of having learned some very interesting things. I'm wondering, not that I'm the greatest supporter of compensation. I know it has its place and purpose, but do you know whether or not there will be, like, for example, tree planting conservation compensation efforts done along this route as time goes on? Have you any understanding if that's part of the development project?
Yeah, does anyone, Christine or Maureen, you want to answer? Shall I answer?
I just had something to say, like, with regards to what we've seen at, you know, for landowners on Sumas Mountain, for example. Like, it's not good. It's not good. Like,
you mean the compensation itself, or yeah?
Yeah. Like, I went out to do sort of like an ecological inventory from this landowner out on Sumas Mountain, and she was really concerned because her drinking water source, which was the creek coming past the house, which also happens to support mountain beaver and like amazing biodiversity, bobcat, you name it. And that's right where, yeah, so she was dealing with Trans Mountain, and they promised that, you know, they would make everything, they would restore the riparian zone and plant it with really good quality plants. And actually, Lynn Perrin from Pipe Up Network has done a lot of documentation of follow-up on especially landowner compensation of degradation, and it's not quality at all, and
No,
it's not good.
no, and you know, reality is that nature, whether it's trees or excuse me, flowing water, they're where they are for a reason. And, you know, whether it's slope of land or soil or whatever it is, that when you take that away and then try and compensate somewhere else, there's no guarantee that that substrate is going to support the same growth, even if it's 2 to 1, you know, as the Fisheries Act used to be. I think it still is, hopefully, but it never, to my satisfaction anyway, never really seems to compensate for what is really taken away. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And one, just sort of on that same thread, what I've noticed is with the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline, I think that the way they're thinking about the route planners, the way they're thinking about it, obviously it's a very complex thing, having to choose where your pipeline goes, because there's a lot of buried utilities that we can't see and other very important infrastructure. But I think what we're seeing, and we saw this in the Brunette corridor, is like they see, oh, look, there's this piece of land between the highway and the railway tracks. It's just forest, which, you know, means it is such high value because you don't have people walking around in there. You don't have anything happening in there. It's just a place for creatures. And they say, oh, let's just put it right through the middle. And so then they leave this tiny edge on one side and this tiny edge on the other, and they cut the whole thing down. And they're doing this in Surrey right now with the North Slope Buffer Park there. They're just like, let's put it right in the middle. There's a fringe on one side, the fringe on the other, and neither of those fringes are going to survive. They're too thin, they're going to get blown down, and they just wreck the whole thing. So it just seems to me there's no value given in their calculus for the value of this urban nature space, this urban green space that we all know is so crucial to creatures. Like, they just cut it down.
There's a disconnect, isn't there, in the sense that we value salmon to as we should, And yet if we think about even Stony Creek or the Brunette River, the efforts to reestablish the salmon there has been incredible, actually. But here we go again. Are salmon not valuable? So why would we repeat this exercise? So there's a competition here of, are fish more valuable than oil and that economy? Fish is nature. So is it just that nature doesn't compete with oil? It's just kind of a funny speaking out of two sides of mouths. What really are we trying to do here? Because it's still not working.
You finished it?
No. Sorry.
Yeah, and we also have, it's just tricky now that the Canadian government is so on the hook for this project, because they're simultaneously owning it and regulating it and trying to profit from it. And it's a difficult position to be in. I mean, as it was when Environment and Climate Change Canada said, stop work on ourselves, if you're the government of Canada, the two different pieces of the regulatory system. Yeah. Complicated. But you can get rid of all that complication just by going and sitting and being with the birds. It's so nice. Yeah, we got a great glimpse of the redpolls the other day when we were out looking for hummer nests. So special. There's so many beautiful birds out in the spring. Right now, it's so nice to be outside right now.
And sorry, one more thing, if I can jump in. No cutting of trees with nests up until the end of March. Is that only applicable to migratory birds, or is that across the board birds? Any nesting whatsoever?
No, it's just migratory.
It is just migratory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, raptors and other more important birds, would be protected.
Okay. Yeah.
Provincially.
I wanted to just reinforce, we do have I put my email and the Community Nest Finding Network Gmail in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me if it's easier to find me than Sarah, if you want any more information, or even just to come out and sit with me sometime in the wee hours, well, not wee hours, the early hours, help me get there. And there's one place that isn't fenced off at all yet. It may be their very last cutting area. And it's really, you can just walk right in and plunk down, and sometimes nothing's going on. And one day there was just a whole lot going on. So there's definitely, if you feel inclined, there are definitely places to go where you won't, that won't be too uncomfortable. Won't be tricky at all.
And Maureen, I'll follow up on just to say, like, the energy and uplift that so many people felt last year when we found when the nest stopped the pipeline, like we can amplify any nest that's found. So even if it doesn't really result in like a province-wide shutdown or whatever, the people and the media both are looking for reasons to celebrate small miracles. And like when we're in these impossible situations, something comes up, like if we found a hummingbird nest, they'll
be on it.
The heart lifting is the most important thing that would come from that. So beyond, the minutia of saving some trees for a month or two, it's like the story of hope that we can make a difference in the world would just be so wonderful. So it's only a matter of time before we find it, I think.
My last question, Sarah, would be, you've indicated that there is a cutting window restriction for federal, but what about provincial? I should know that, but I'm not sure what the cutting restrictions are for the year-round birds through the provincial authorities.
I don't know.
Not aware of it? Yeah.
No, I'm not aware.
I'll look into that.
Yeah. Yeah, good thinking. We definitely were hoping to find a raptor nest. There's a red-tailed hawk that is using the whole region, the Brunette corridor, from all the way from Brunette and North Road and all the way to Gallardy. and
Yeah.
probably, Burnaby Lake, there's this red tail that we know that, but there are no nests that we can find that we've seen. So.
Well, thank you
There's
very
a
much.
question in the chat from Carolyn Penn.
Okay.
Carolyn, did you want to repeat your question out loud?
I just, since you had mentioned the salmon, I just wondered, along the same lines. I mean, certainly loss of tree habitat and shade will have a pretty profound effect, I would think. I know that they're watching them, but has it started to affect the salmon run at this point through those small creeks?
I don't think anyone's been paying attention to the direct correlation there. And I think what I would imagine is that there's a cumulative impact when there's, tree and bush removing, and then rain that's bringing sediment into the creeks, and also the heating and cooling as a result of the tree loss, like all those things. And then when you look at that cumulatively over a bunch of little feeder streams and how they impact the Brunette, both in terms of temperature, but also I think more importantly in terms of like flash floods, after rains, we're seeing these extreme rain events that are predicted to become more and more common. So when we take away that spongy growth layer and the roots that hold the land, it's it's bound to have an impact. But
especially with the heat waves, I mean, there will be no shade. There'll be the temperature of the streams is just bound to be probably above viability at some point.
And I think that's why we're trying to keep the tar sands where it is. It's really the fundamental goal. Nest finding is a beautiful thing to talk about, but the deeper goal for me is that bigger purpose as a mother. Just one small thing I can try and do with others.
Well, and if there aren't any more questions, maybe we can rest with our inspiration from the presentation tonight. And I think the words of Christine and Sarah are really quite heartening. And I'm just so amazed with the kind of the caring and discernment and the persistence of the folks in Protect the Planet, Stop TMX. And you're working for us all. And I think we still can stop TMX. It's on the one hand, there's the big financial issue, and then the other hand, there's all the lobbying happening of, oh wow, the war in Ukraine, and we've all got to increase. Let's have another pipeline. Like as one commentator said in Canadian politics, there's any occasion is a good excuse to build a pipeline. So there's going to be a lot of propaganda going on in a lot of levels. But I think especially the diluted bitumen and the tankers and all that element, as well as all the climate change issues, I think this is just still really a project that it's really worth continuing to push back on.
Yeah, it seems to me the work that you've done there, it's taken it one level up from just mere hope to effectiveness. You proved that it's effective. All you had before was hope. This is proof that it works, and that's given me a lot of happiness for the work that you've done. And thank you very, very much for all the work that the three of you have done. It's just it's very heartening to me. So thank you very much, and thank you for presenting your findings so far. It's hopefully we can do this again next year at this time and get an update whenever you feel like it. So, well, thank you very much.
And I need to thank Christine. I need to thank Christine and Maureen for the work in the presentation. Christine put most of the presentation, all of the presentation together, and it was so incredible. Yeah. Thank you so much, Christine and Maureen, for coordinating.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you for having us.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and look forward to doing some bird watching with you soon.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. It's both heartwarming and heart-wrenching to hear the stories, but it's very encouraging to hear
Yeah.
the actions that you've taken and the results that it has.
Nigel.
And also thanks to Selena for hosting, making the
Thank you,
computer
Selena.
and the things go.
Yes,
Selena, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, technical, yeah, that's big, that's big. Well, feel free to reach out to us, folks, and thanks again for everything Nature Vancouver does on so many levels. And I believe, Nigel, could you just say when, or Bev, when is the end of the comment period for Roberts Bank?
Roberts Bank is March 15th. So,
March 15th.
and just go to the Nature Vancouver website. Roberts Bank is right on the front. There's great instructions Bev has put together on how to make your comment.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.